Dear ladies and gentlemen, the signing ceremony begins.
خانم‌ها و آقایان محترم، مراسم امضای معاهده آغاز می‌گردد.
Following the results of the Russian-Iranian talks at the highest level, President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and President of the Islamic Republic of Iran Masoud sign an agreement on a comprehensive strategic partnership between the Russian Federation and the Islamic Republic of Iran.
در خاتمه مذاکرات فیمابین جمهوری اسلامی ایران و فدراسیون روسیه در سطح عالی، رئیس جمهور فدراسیون روسیه جناب آقای ولادیمیریچ پوتین و رئیس جمهور اسلامی ایران جناب آقای مسعود پزشکیان معاهده مشارکت جامعه راهبردی بین فدراسیون روسیه و جمهوری اسلامی ایران را امضا می‌نمایند.
The ceremony is over. We turn to the press conference of the President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran Masoud.
پایان مراسم امضای معاهده اعلام می‌گردد. آغاز کنفرانس خبری رئیس جمهور فدراسیون روسیه جناب آقای
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
رئیس جمهور اسلامی ایران جناب آقای مسعود پزشکیان.
Dear Mr. President, dear friends, I am sincerely glad to welcome the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Mr. Masoud Pezeshkian, to Moscow, with whom we have just completed detailed negotiations within the framework of his official visit to Russia. Our country attaches paramount importance to the further strengthening of friendly and good neighborly Russian-Iranian relations. These relations are based on the principles of equality, respect and consideration of each other's interests, mutual assistance and support, which are consistently implemented in concrete cases, and the multifaceted bilateral partnership is steadily developing from year to year. An intensive political dialogue is maintained. Last year, Mr. Kazishkin and I held 2 meetings, including during the BRICS summit in Kazan. The foreign ministries and the Security Council are in close contact. Cooperation between Russia and Iran in the economic, social, and cultural spheres is advancing more and more actively. Coordination has been established through line ministries, business circles, and representatives of the public interact fruitfully. Youth, parliamentary, and interregional contacts are carried out on a regular basis. In other words, the ties between our 2 countries are large-scale and mutually beneficial. And we are united in the fact that, in order not to stop there and bring the relationship to a qualitatively new level, this is the meaning of the signed Interstate Agreement on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. It sets ambitious goals and outlines guidelines for deepening bilateral cooperation for the long term in politics and security, in trade, investment, and humanitarian fields. And this truly breakthrough document is aimed at creating the necessary conditions for the stable and sustainable development of Russia and Iran, our entire common Eurasian region. I have already mentioned that the talks we had with the President of Iran today were very useful and informative. They really took place in a constructive, friendly way. We discussed the full range of issues on the bilateral agenda, exchanged views on pressing international and regional issues. Naturally, the topic of economic cooperation was discussed in detail during the negotiations. In Russia and Iran, they are significant partners for each other in trade, finance, and investment. and the pace of cooperation in these areas is steadily growing. Over the 10 months of last year, the trade turnover increased by 15.5%. It is characteristic that our country has almost completely switched to national currencies in mutual settlements, is striving to build stable channels of credit and banking interaction, and is working on the integration of national payment systems. So, in the 24th year, the share of transactions in Russian rubles and Iranian rials exceeded 95% of all bilateral trade transactions. Undoubtedly, the expected entry into force of a full-format free trade agreement between Iran and the Eurasian Economic Union will allow increasing Russian-Iranian commercial ties. Let me also remind you that on December 26, 2024, Iran was granted the status of an observer state for the Eurosec. We see this as another step forward in the development of Iran's relations with Russia and other members of the Union. The most important area of Russian-Iranian cooperation is energy. The flagship joint project for the construction of 2 new Bushehr units by Rosatom is being promoted. Its implementation will certainly make a significant contribution to strengthening Iran's energy security and stimulate further growth of the national economy. They will provide Iranian households and industrial enterprises with inexpensive and environmentally friendly electricity. We attach great importance to cooperation in the transport sector and the expansion of oncoming rail transport. Great prospects are opening up in connection with the development of the international North-South corridor. The discussion of issues related to the construction of its section of the Oresh-Toster railway line continues. The implementation of this project would help to establish seamless logistics from Russia and Belarus to Iranian ports in the Persian Gulf. Cooperation in the humanitarian sphere is deepening. The opening of the Russian Cultural Center in Tehran is on the agenda. In June, non-cultures of Russia are planned in Iran, within the framework of which numerous exhibitions, concerts, theatrical productions, and other bright cultural events will take place. We are convinced that all of them will find a broad positive response from the Iranian audience. Oncoming tourist flows are growing. This is facilitated by direct flights between many Russian and Iranian cities, as well as the decisions taken in 2000 on visa-free group tourist trips and on the issuance of electronic visas for individual tourists. Russia is helping Iran to train qualified personnel. Currently, more than 9,000 Iranian students are studying in Russian universities, including about 600 at the expense of the Russian federal budget. All issues of bilateral cooperation are monitored by the Permanent Russian-Iranian Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation. It was agreed that its next meeting will be held in the first half of this year in Moscow. Of course, Mr. President, and I have also considered a number of topical foreign policy topics. The positions of Russia and Iran, on most of them, largely coincide. Our countries firmly defend the principles of the rule of international law, the sovereignty of states. Do not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, pursue an independent course on the world stage. Together, resolutely resist external pressure and the dictates of the practice of applying illegitimate, politically motivated sanctions. Coordinates efforts in key areas and on key international platforms, including within the UN, and also in the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. When discussing the latest developments in Syria, we stressed that Russia has been and remains committed to a comprehensive settlement in this country based on respect for its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. I am ready to continue to provide the Syrian people with the necessary support in matters of normalizing the situation, providing urgent humanitarian assistance, and launching a full-scale post-conflict reconstruction. At the same time, we proceed from the fact that Syrians themselves should determine the future in Syria through an inclusive dialogue. And we sincerely wish the Syrian people to successfully overcome all the emerging challenges associated with the current transition period. They also touched upon the problems of the Middle East settlement. In the light of the agreement reached recently on the cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip, according to which Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners released from Israel should be reunited with their families. No less significantly, there is an opportunity for a significant increase in the volume of food, fuel, and medicines supplied to Gaza. All of this, we hope, will contribute to the relief of the humanitarian situation and long-term stabilization in the sector. At the same time, it is important not to weaken efforts for a comprehensive settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict on universally recognized international legal basis, which provides for the creation of an independent Palestinian state, existing in peace and security with Israel. We also touched upon the issues of cooperation between Russia and Iran in Transcaucasia with Mr. President. It is in the interests of both our countries to maintain peace and stability in this region. In general, the reconciliation of ours on all these and other regional issues was, in our opinion, very useful and timely. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that we are satisfied with the results of the current negotiations. I am sure that the agreements reached will contribute to further strengthening the entire complex of Russian-Iranian relations and ties. And, of course, this will be served by the signed interstate agreement. Thank you for your attention. In the name of the merciful, merciful God, and dear colleagues, representatives of the media, Mr. President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, I would like to thank you, and also express my gratitude to the Russian people, as well as to the Russian government, for the hospitality extended to me and my delegation. I hope that our bilateral contacts will continue within the framework of our interests. And, of course, from today, we will witness a broader opportunity for the development of bilateral relations. Within the framework of the neighborhood policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Russian Federation takes on very important values for us. And in recent years, I can say that we are planning a very large exchange of delegations between our countries. And this process is still ongoing, for which we are very grateful to our colleagues in Russia. I think that there are certain mechanisms for how we will continue to work within the framework of trade and economic relations. We decided to remove the obstacles in the way of our relationship. We have conducted a complete, so to speak, inspection of all our issues. We have discussed the whole range of our relations and have come to the conclusion that we need to continue working in this positive spirit. And in this way, both in the bilateral board, in the regional, and in the international arena. Today's big agreement, which was signed, will open a new big chapter in our relations, especially with regard to trade and economic relations between Iran and Russia. I am sure that this document has been drawn up on the basis of the interests of our countries, and it will certainly be able to prepare the necessary channel for our further cooperation. Iran and Russia are not determined to remove small, insignificant obstacles in the way of trade and economic relations. As for customs issues, as for banking and monetary issues, as well as our investment projects, as well as visa-free regime between our countries. We have discussed these issues, and within the framework of this agreement, we will have the opportunity to discuss these topics in the future. I would like to note the importance of Iran's observation within the framework of the Eurasian Economic Union. This is of great importance to us. I think that within the framework of this union, we can increase the level of cooperation between our parties in Russia. Joint approaches, a joint view of Iran and Russia in the fight against terrorism and extremism, is also one of our bases for further cooperation. We discussed the directions of cooperation in the South Caucasus, Syria, the Middle East, and Afghanistan. I think there are some changes that are taking place in our region, taking into account the role of new organizations and structures like BRICS, like the SCO. Indeed, this is a new opportunity, a new potential for the affairs of both countries to interact in the future. The active participation of Iran and Russia in these regional new structures is of great importance for all of us. I would like to say once again that the introduction of hostilities and war is not a solution to the issues. And we welcome the settlement, the political settlement of the issue between Ukraine and Russia. We have to respect each other. And, of course, Western countries should not force others to subordinate themselves. As for the Israeli regime's airstrikes against Lebanon from Syria, I think we have agreed in this opinion that we call for and emphasize the importance of refraining from such strikes. We hope that the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip will actually be implemented. At the end, I would like to thank my dear colleague, the Russian President, once again for his hospitality, and for the good relations that have developed between the fraternal people of the Russian Federation. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, representatives of the mass media, good afternoon again. You have the opportunity to ask 2 questions from each side to the respected heads of state. Let's get started. According to tradition, we will ask our Iranian guests to ask the first question. A representative of the Iranian news channel. Hello, Mr. President. Russian President Vladimir Putin. Mr. President, taking into account the fact that we are also going to raise the issue of a large agreement, I would like to ask the distinguished presidents of the 2 countries to answer my question. We all know that Iran and Russia, we have deep cultural and social approaches. We are 2 big, strong countries in this region. We have great opportunities. We both oppose a unipolar world. Iran and Russia stand for a new world order based on multipolarity, and we participate in important new structures like the SCO, and the Eurasian Economic Union, and the BRICS. Taking into account all these common approaches, but still we see that our bilateral relations, especially in the field of economy and trade, do not correspond to our relations in the field of politics. Here is a specific question. What is the prospect of our relations, taking into account today's agreement, in the future? What can we expect? What can we hope for? What will happen in the future, taking into account today's agreement? Thank you very much. Strengthening the treaty on the legal basis, of course, creates the best conditions for resolving issues of bilateral cooperation in all areas. One of the most important for us is the trade and economic direction of our cooperation. We have already spoken with Mr. President, both in a narrow format and in a broad format. We have looked at how Russia's relations are developing with some of our other neighboring countries, with countries with much less potential, both economically and in terms of population inferior to Iran, I would say tenfold. We have a much larger turnover. It's easy at times. With such a large country as Iran, 85 million people, of course, the level of trade and economic ties, the volume of trade and economic cooperation does not correspond, of course, to our capabilities. The point of the agreement concluded today is precisely to create additional conditions, basic additional conditions, for the development of trade and economic ties. Here, to put it simply, we need less bureaucracy and more concrete cases. This is why we have gathered today to discuss issues related to financial settlements, related to speeding up decision-making in the field of logistics issues, related to customs issues, and so on and so forth. In the energy sector, Mr. President mentioned that I also said that Iran is expanding its cooperation with the Eurasian Economic Union. All of this together, in my opinion, creates very good conditions for us to take such serious, decisive steps forward. We have good projects in all areas, which I have just mentioned. I very much hope that through joint efforts, we have an intergovernmental commission actively working, that we will move forward through joint efforts. I don't even have any doubts about this. Obstacles, no matter what difficulties are created for us from the outside, we are able to overcome all this and move on. I am sure that it will be so. Thank you very much for the question. As for the prospects of our cooperation, taking into account the big agreement, we are convinced that it was from the first days of the presidential elections that I also said that the first important step of the case for my government is that we should strengthen our cooperation with neighboring parties and expand opportunities for further cooperation. Naturally speaking, the Russian Federation is a big country with which we have very good political relations and is of great importance to us in the region and in the world. And in order to strengthen our bilateral relations in all areas without exception, first of all, we had to, so to speak, check our relations, and the other, so to speak, new contractual basis. What can we do in the future? It was still necessary to work out a new mechanism, update our agreement. What my colleague, dear President, said in the field of investment projects, in the field of industry, in the field of scientific research and educational programs. We have very good projects, we have very good commissions, and under the commission with the working group, they all decided that in the future these subgroups and working groups would form a new contractual basis, so that we could expand the scope of our country's activities on the basis of this agreement. And this, of course, is within the framework of our common policy to ensure the security of the region, to fight against a unipolar world. And, of course, we are convinced that we can cooperate in our region without external influence, without players from our region. And our neighbors are very big neighbors, there are great potentials. And we can say that we will not need to listen to the advice of the Pacific countries. I am very glad that I am here today, and there will be a very good prospect. Thank you very much. Interfax question, please, Pavel Minikov. Hello, Interfax News Agency. I have a question for both presidents. I have just talked about projects, and in particular I am interested in how two of them are developing. A year ago, the countries announced the implementation of the project. Plans to implement a project to build a gas pipeline from Russia to Iran in order to supply Russian oil and gas there. This issue was discussed at the talks today. What are the successes in the implementation of these plans, and what are the expected volumes? And the second project is the well-known North-South International Transport Corridor. How successfully is it expanding? How successfully is it developing? And what difficulties are there, if any, on the way to further expansion of this project? There are always difficulties in one project, in the second, and in all the others. There are always some issues that require a coordination. B. Taking into account the situation that develops in one or another area of the economy, in logistics, transport, or energy. There are a lot of questions here. This is the coordination of prices. Approaches these approvals in different ways. It depends a lot. He is sitting next to you, Mr. Miller, and he will tell you what the caloric content of oil and gas is, and so on, and so on. But these are technical issues, they are consistent. But the projects are in the works. Both projects are very important and very interesting. If we talk about the volume of possible supplies, we believe that we need to start with small volumes, up to 2 billion cubic meters. And in general, this can reach the volume of supplies to Iran, up to 55 billion cubic meters of gas per year. There are also possible areas of cooperation in the field of oil. We have a huge project in the nuclear power industry. One block is already working. It is working successfully, and we are now discussing the possibility of building additional blocks. There we have a little shift to the right. It is connected with calculations, with payment. There are no secrets here for anyone, but nevertheless the work is going on. It is moving forward. Thousands of people are already working at these facilities. And about 80% of the construction work is carried out by local companies. This is a big and serious job. She moves without any questions that require our attention. But that's why we are going to solve these issues. As for North-South, we are interested in this. These are additional opportunities to promote our products, both Iranian and Russian, to world markets. Not only we are interested in this, but also those countries that are actively developing trade and economic ties with us. There are technical issues. They are administrative, financial, and organizational. But they decide, and we have created a special office to work on this project. We have Deputy Prime Minister Savleev dealing with this issue closely, constantly visits Iran, meets here with Iranian partners. These projects are in the works, and we assume that they will be implemented. As for gas cooperation, of course, in the continuation of my conversation, I can say the following. A person as an organism has certain capabilities. It is the vessels that supply the necessary energy to different parts of the body. And we need the same vessels as the routes of energy supply to the right places. We talked about this, that the route of supply of materials, energy, and any goods. We have to work on it. We need exactly these delivery structures. I think that in order to achieve the same result, we still need to update the fuel and energy supply route. This is the issue that our colleagues have been working on for a long time. We are ready to renew and restore the possibilities of supplying this product, as for gas, electricity, as for other energy carriers, as well as renewable energy sources. And we talked about it. I think our team, the expert team, is working on both sides. We are convinced that we can. We can do this, and we must eliminate any obstacles so that they do not exist in the future, so that the delivery route is drawn up and the floor power can work. Of course, there are a number of technical issues. Great steps have been taken, and I can say that we can once again open a new page in the field of energy cooperation between Iran and Russia in this way. And every day, of course, we need to strengthen the management capabilities of these processes.
سوال بنده این بود که با توجه به روابط خوب
Taking into account the good relations between Iran and Russia, as well as today's agreement that was signed, the main policies of the Russian Federation regarding the international agenda, as well as regional cooperation, especially in our region. How can all this be implemented in practice? We have been coordinating our efforts in the international arena for a long time. This concerns the most pressing issues on the agenda of the international community. But this is the Middle East, this is a region, and I have also talked about this now, the region of the South Caucasus. This all directly affects our interests. Mr. President mentioned the conflict in the Ukrainian direction. Our colleagues are aware of what is happening there. We are constantly informing our Iranian friends in this direction. But in general, by and large, we proceed from the priority of international law, from the fact that it is based on the Charter of the United Nations. And all that concerns building relations, these relations in the international arena should be based on the principles of the UN Charter, with respect for the interests of all participants in international communication and non-interference in internal affairs. These are the fundamental things that we adhere to. The agreement that we signed today creates an additional, as I have already said, substantial, such a serious basis for building relations of a trusting nature and based on the principles I have just mentioned. This is an agreement on our priorities, on compliance with these priorities. This is a treaty that allows us to strengthen our bilateral ties in the interests of the people of Iran and the peoples of the Russian Federation. Our colleagues asked the question. I think that the agreement that we signed today, with regard to our cooperation in the regional dimension, we will be able to contribute to the establishment of stability, the establishment of peace in our region especially. We can, through dialogue, consultations, respecting the territorial integrity of the country, as well as refraining from the involvement of regional forces in our region. We regional countries can and are not able to resolve our issues in the region. I think that similar dialogues that took place between us, if the same one took place with other countries, we would be able to significantly reduce the level of issues. We could eliminate obstacles at the borders when some parties at the borders create artificial difficulties, of course. This is a big barrier. Our policy is that on the basis of mutual interests, of course, we can build good relations with regional players. And we are able to resolve all issues and remove all obstacles. Especially when it comes to the Middle East. Thank you very much. Final question. Be kind, please. News of the Blue, Victor. Thank you. Victor Siniak, Sik Izvestia. I have a question for both leaders. It is already obvious to everyone that the old world order has come to an end. The world is moving to a multipolar model. It is not easy to move. Tell me how, with such constant turbulence in the Middle East, is it possible to maintain the balance of power? I have already said, relying on the Charter of the United Nations. This is what we need to strive for. This is what we need to go for, and not try to use the norms of international law. In some selfish interests, momentarily turning in a favorable direction for one or a group of states, and not replace the uncharter with some rules that I have already said 1,000 times, no one has seen.
Выгодную для себя сторону одному либо группе государств. И не подменять устав ООН какими-то правилами, которых я 1000 раз уже сказал, никто не видел.
A return to understanding what the United Nations organization was created for, and following the principles set out in the Charter documents. That's the most important thing. Of course, this is a complex tool. And let me remind you, back in the Soviet Union, our foreign minister Gromyko was called Mr. No, Mr. No. Why? Because it was difficult, and then it was very difficult to coordinate all issues, and even in the conditions of the Cold War. But this is what the UN was created for at the time, in order to look for acceptable solutions, and not implement unacceptable ones unilaterally. But at some point it seemed to someone that it was possible to solve everything unilaterally and subjugate the United Nations itself. And if it does not obey, then declare it unnecessary. And then, when the need arose, to recall what principles are laid down in the Charter of the United Nations. So we need to go back to the origins of the organization and proceed from the fact that both small and large countries are all equal. They have equal rights, and we need to treat this properly, with respect. As my dear colleague, Mr. President noted, double standards have come to the end of their lives. The fact that one side has every right to kill ordinary citizens, to kill children, to kill women, to destroy some hospitals at school, and then they themselves assert a position on human rights, and then they show us the way. And let's say in another country, especially for us, they argue that it is necessary. We need to respect human rights according to their rules. These are double standards. We are unacceptable. They are unacceptable to us. Such untruthful human rights. What is happening in Lebanon, in Syria, in the Gaza Strip? You see that the bloodshed is endless. You have seen everything with your own eyes. In no framework was it even allowed within the framework of international organizations to ensure the safety of women and children. And how can we talk about it further? No one has ever been allowed to destroy hospitals and schools, routes, communications, but all this happened before our eyes. In the Middle East, these are double standards that are unacceptable to us. This is with great regret. What else is going on? I think today's agreements, especially agreements with other countries that are committed to international agreements, we want the unipolar world to not be able to show us the way anymore. Neither can double standards, so to speak, govern the world. There are no differences between small and big sides. Everyone is equal, as my friend said. And if we want to respect human rights are the affairs of everyone, not just the affairs of a certain group, in a certain country. Human rights, the affairs of everyone around the world. And today, it is a meeting that took place here, and the agreements that were reached between our sides. I think this is another impetus and incentive towards building a multipolar world. And, of course, first of all, it concerns the development of Iran and Russia. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We conclude the press conference. We thank the heads of state, delegations, and representatives of the media. Thank you.